Okay, let's discuss the corticospinal tract in few minutes. So firstly, I'm making a schematic diagram of spinal cord, and let us divide it into different layers. So the first layer is our motor cortex, which is also known as the precentral gyrus, and then we have the pyramidal decussation. So this decussation is present in the medullary spinal junction. So this level is the medullary spinal junction, above which is the medulla, and the rest is the spinal cord. So we are discussing corticospinal tract. So this is the tract which contains the motor pathway. So any information about motor sensation is first generated by the brain. So the body wants to move a muscle, it must generate that idea first in the cortex, and then that idea is propagated by this neuron, which travels down the spinal cord. So as it is traveling down, it is decussating. So decussation means crossing. So it crosses. So let us divide the spinal cord into two halves, which is right and left. And the right side of the cortex will decussate into the left side of the spinal cord. So this is a single neuron that is traveling up to the level of the muscle. So let us draw the spinal cord here. So this is the spinal cord. This is the butterfly orientation of the nerve roots. This is the spinal canal, and this nerve is the upper motor neuron nerve because it is traveling from the cortex up to the level of spinal cord. And then here it will then give the signal to the second order neurons, which is present in the ventral horn. So this second order neuron is the lower motor neuron, which receives a signal from the cortex that the brain wants to move a muscle. So here we have the muscle. Now this is the basis of the corticospinal tract. There are only two neurons that are involved. The first degree order neurons are the upper motor neuron, and the second order neurons are the lower motor neurons. Now we must understand what happens during lesion. So if there is a lesion in the left side of the lower motor neuron, then it will produce a weakness known as flaccid weakness, which is accompanied by hypotonia, and the Babinski is negative, the Babinski sign is not present. So this lesion is always ipsilateral to the neurological deficit. So the deficit is always ipsilateral to the site of the lesion. So this is one of the major principles on solving many MCQs that we will discuss in the next part. Now what happens when the upper motor neuron is damaged? So before that, I must also again reiterate that when there is a lesion in this element, then the function of this muscle is lost. So only this part of the muscle will show flaccidity, hypotonia, and it is only present in the left side. So if it is an arm muscle, then the left arm flaccidity is present. So we should suspect that the lesion is at the level of element, that is in the peripheral nerve. But what happens if the injury is in the upper motor neuron? So let us suspect it is a bit higher than the spinal section. The lesion is higher, and it involves the part of the upper motor neuron. Then always the lesion of upper motor neuron is spastic. So the weakness is very spastic, hypertonic, and often it also presents with Babinski sign. And if the lesion occurs in the level of spinal cord, this section is all spinal cord, then the lesion and the neurological deficit is ipsilateral. So this is another principle to stand by while solving many questions. But if the lesion occurs in the cortex due to any kind of stroke or brain hemorrhage or anything that insults this pathway in the cortex, then the lesion and the site of deficit are opposite to each other. So here our right cortex is gone, but the deficit occurs just below the lesion. So everything below this lesion shows spastic weakness. So this is and it is confined to the opposite side, that is contralateral. So there is contralateral spastic weakness in the opposite side of the lesion. So let us solve this question using the principle that we have just learned. So in this question, there is a 45-year-old man that presents to the neurology clinic with weakness in his right arm and leg. So from this line alone, we know from our principles that it is not the element lesion, because element is confined to only a set of muscles, confined to specific muscles, whereas the effect of upper motor neuron is confined to broad set of muscles, because the deficit occurs wholly below the level of lesion, whereas only a set of muscle supplied by the element is shows deficit, but in case of upper motor neuron damage, everything below the lesion shows spastic deficit. So this developed gradually over the past 2 weeks. On examination, he has increased muscle tone. So we now for sure know that it is an upper motor neuron weakness. So this weakness is in the right upper and lower limbs. Hyperreflexia is also present, so this is another UMN deficit. And we also have positive Babinski on the right side. Preserved sensation, and the sensation is preserved. So we know that the spinal cord also contain sensory pathways. So these sensory pathways, which are supplied by the dorsal root ganglion, is intact because the whole of the spinal cord has not been injured. So from this we know that the spinal cord has not been injured. So the level of injury of the upper motor neuron is not in the spinal cord. So from that we now know for sure that the lesion has occurred at the level of brain, that is the motor cortex. So the lesion is always contralateral to the deficit in case of motor cortex. So our answer is left motor cortex. So how do we rule out option number B? So it is based on the simple principle that if the lesion involves the cortex, the deficit is always contralateral. So contralateral to right is left, so the deficit should be left. But according to the question, the deficit is in the right side. So option B is ruled out. Now in option C, it follows the same principle. So option C says left tract in the cervical spinal cord, and as we know, if the lesion involves the spinal cord, then the deficit is always ipsilateral. And ipsilateral to left is left, but the deficit is in the right side. So how do we rule out the last option? So if the lesion is in the right tract of the spinal cord, of the thoracic spinal cord, then we know the deficit is again ipsilateral since it is the spinal cord, and ipsilateral to right is right, so the deficit is also in the right. But since it involves the thoracic spinal cord, it is just below C5 to T1, which involves the brachial plexus, and brachial plexus supplies the upper limbs. And if the lesion is below T1, then the brachial plexus is spared, and if it is spared, upper limbs are not involved. But according to the question, upper limbs are also involved along with the legs. So this is not possible, because if there is lesion in the thoracic spinal cord, the deficit is below the level of lesion and in the right side, and is limited onto the legs, while the upper limbs are spared. So the option D is also ruled out, and the answer is A.